Television used to move at broadcast speed, fixed schedules, fixed seasons, episodes. Then TiVo came along and broke the rhythm. It gave us, the viewers, control for the first time to pause, to rewind, to record. And in doing so, it redefined what it meant to own viewing experience. But today it's no longer about pressing pause, it's about connecting platforms, partners, and fragmented audiences in a way that accelerates growth for everyone. And guess what? That's where TiVo finds itself again, at the center of change, not as a device on a shelf or on the wall, but as a bridge in a complex connected TV ecosystem. So let's explore this and more with Chris Kleinschmidt, VP of CTV Advertising Sales at TiVo. A warm welcome, Chris, to Media Unscripted.
Annie, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here as part of Media Unscripted.
Great. Let's start with collaboration. The TiVo and Titan and Tubi alliance isn't just another partnership, I don't think. It's almost like a blueprint for growth in our industry. And it's in such a fragmented TV landscape. It feels like a smarter, more connected way to move the industry forward. But what's the real strategic thinking behind this collaboration?
So first of all, Annie, did you just steal all of that out of my brain? Because I think, you clearly, you're in my dreams. So absolutely, I think when you think about the partnership that we announced with Titan, there's no doubt that we think this is a blueprint because, quite frankly, this whole idea of connected TV and how it's evolved / hasn't evolved in a lot of areas over the last 10 plus years, I think you're going to see a lot more of these types of partnerships. So I think this is really just the start. But I mean, honestly, before I kind of get into some of this, the timing of this is really interesting. Just literally last week, I was part of an event in Germany talking literally about this exact same topic. So completely coincidental, talking about collaboration, particularly as it relates to us and Titan, but also some other things that I've been seeing in the CTV space. So I think it's, again, just a really interesting time. But I don't know. So one thing that I find really fascinating, and I'd be curious to get your thoughts on it, Annie, but I think this is some news that didn't get enough attention as it relates to kind of CTV collaboration. And that was really the announcement earlier this year, not that long ago, around Netflix putting their inventory into Amazon DSP. Mm-hmm. If you want to talk about two massive walled gardens now collaborating, that right there can't be one of the, that's got to be one of the biggest stories that I think is hitting the market this year. And it kind of went relatively unknown.
I agree, but even the collaboration between Netflix and TF1 in France, when the broadcast and streaming, there's quite a lot of it. I mean, yes, the Amazon you mentioned, but even closer to home, when you talk, when you think ITV, Channel 4, and Sky and the ad market, I'm really surprised how little there is, as you say, in the media, because it's a huge thing. Everybody complains about CTV being fragmented, when in reality we're playing together nicely and we're growing together.
So I think it's at the cusp. I think it's starting, right. And here, to take a step back, one analogy that I like to bring up, or not even an analogy, but just a user experience. Think of yourself turning on a television set, a smart TV these days. And I was walking through this in my mind, trying to explain this to some people. You turn a TV set on right now. You go and grab your smart TV remote control. Literally on that remote control, there are buttons that can direct you into specific apps on your TV. Those typically aren't there for free. So you've already kind of got an influence or some sort of kind of advertisement that's right there in your hand the second you are about to turn the television set on. Then you turn the TV on, and these days, most smart TVs will have a very kind of large, well-integrated homepage ad unit that's going to kind of hit you as the first thing you see when you do turn that television set on. From there, you might jump into an EPG to then go watch live linear TV. At that point, when you're in the EPG, there could be more ads that are promoting specific pieces of content or non-entertainment brands. You then jump into the content and you're watching, let's just say, traditional linear TV on your smart TV. And then you start to get served all sorts of linear TV ads that everybody's used to for the last, decades, 40, 50, 60 years. Then you jump out of that, you go into another app that be more streaming over IP, whether it's Netflix, Amazon, whoever it might be. They've got their own homepage ad units that they might be selling you ads towards. Then you go into the content and you've got more ads in there.
Hey,
like
let's
right
monetize
there,
every inch of a screen.
everything.
Let's just hope that audiences and their attention stays the same rather than fleeing somewhere else.
Well, but it's not even about attention so much. I think for me, like we talk about the fragmentation, and that right there, I think summarizes it. You've got a very real scenario of somebody just using their TV the way that I think most people would probably use their smart TV. You've got 6 or 7 ad units right there that are held by about 4 or 5 different players. And that right there summarizes fragmentation at its finest. All of those all of those publishers that have the ad units are ultimately reaching the same audience, yet they're all talking to those same brands, trying to say that it's somebody different or somebody unique. This can't continue.
Absolutely. So this will bring the collaboration or partnerships, or what people started calling it co-opetition. But what does genuine co-opetition look like when you are building something together but still competing elsewhere? And here I'm thinking specifically about Titan OS versus TiVo OS. How would it work?
Yeah, and it's funny. I literally have tried to say that word 1,000 times and I get tongue twisted every single time. So I won't even do it. So I'll kind of, but when I think about kind of this cooperation or kind of collaboration, this to me is really interesting because again, when I think about it through the lens of TiVo and Titan, these are 2 really strong independent operating systems that have been into the market, well, let's just say relatively recently, the last kind of 2 to 3 years. Whenever we were kind of thinking about how we could work together, it became pretty obvious that there was a partnership or some synergies that are there. One, first and foremost, is kind of going back to the end users, like the actual consumers, the people that own our TVs that are powered by either TiVo or Titan. And one of the things that I find interesting is when you think about getting apps onto a TV operating system, the apps themselves have limited bandwidths. They've got to figure out how can they actually get enough resources to build and support that app to make sure that it's giving the right content to as many users as possible. But we're seeing all these layoffs happening all across the industry, and those companies are impacted as well. And so us coming together is one way to then go to those app partners and say, listen, we've now got a combined scale footprint reach that is more easily justifiable for you to then put those resources to build that app for our Linux-based operating systems, right? So there's some synergies there on the back end. So the consumers win right out of the gate. And I think that's probably the most important thing.
Consumers and audiences, and I guess the brands, the advertisers. I mean, I find this fascinating how the sort of the words partnership and collaboration are evolving from the sort of transactions and the commercials to a sort of shared almost engine of growth. And I don't want to sound too poetic, but it all sets the stage for TiVo, I feel, and beautifully, because it's a company that clearly learned how to reinvent itself more than once. I had a pleasure of launching a couple of pieces of hardware as well as the partnerships of TV into the market. So yes, I know exactly the pain. I'm just looking at my remote. I actually had to sign off some of those partnerships in the form of a button on my remote. So I understand exactly how this works. But TiVo's story is one of the constant reinvention, in my opinion. It's like from the DVR, the digital video recorder that gave us as audiences, the control to, now the operating system that connects audiences and advertisers, all these apps that you mentioned. It's a remarkable shift. So when you look back at the DVR era, if you can cast your mind that far away, what elements of that innovators' DNA of giving control, understanding the viewer, are still present at TiVo today, that you can do those incredible industry-defining partnerships?
Annie, I think it's actually very funny because you're a true industry expert, so you get this. But I think you actually take for granted that a lot of people, particularly in the UK and in Europe, don't necessarily know who TiVo is. And that's actually what I find really fascinating. Now, the irony is I'm an American that's been living in London now
That's
for
a
the
good
last 8
point.
years.
Yes.
And so I always kind of joke, if you went back to the US right now and you said the name TiVo to basically anybody over the age of 35, 40, they all know exactly who you're talking about. When you kind of get to younger generations, they don't necessarily know. And that basically is the evolution of the business. And to kind of summarize it really quickly, TiVo was launched in 1999. I mean, we're talking over 25 years now, but they were literally the pioneer when it came to DVR and digital video
Exactly.
recording.
Yes.
Like the pioneer. And that, exactly like you're saying, the DNA, that's the core of the company to this day. It is an engineering first, consumer first product. And everything that they've learned over these last 2.5 decades is really how to evolve that thinking to then now shifting into what is becoming the prominent way to reach users via TV screen, which is the operating system. So it was a bit of a natural evolution for them to kind of take all of this software, these learnings, the technology of understanding consumers to now think about, okay, well, let's kind of think about where the puck's going, if you will, for a nice little hockey reference. And fundamentally, if you think about the evolution of smart TVs, like it's really just blossomed in the last 10 years. I think we actually even came out with some stats last week. Funny enough, we did a survey in the UK, and there's still only 80% of UK individuals, only 80% have a smart TV.
That's more than Wi-Fi coverage, I guess. So yes.
But I'm still like, who are these 20%? Where do they live? Like, but even that right there alone.
Maybe this is where there is no Wi-Fi and the internet is so rubbish. They're sticking with linear programming.
No, because we found them. They responded to our survey, so they do exist. They're somewhere, but think about that. To even go from 80% to 100%, like that will happen in the next. I mean, I'm going to predict it's going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years. I mean, you can't buy a TV now unless it's a smart TV. So even that right there, to go from 80% to 100%, that's a 25% growth if and when that starts to happen. And so like even right there, like the opportunities are still huge in front of us, ignoring even the fragmentation side, but just the opportunities for smart TVs to grow is right.
I think that TV is just the most amazing, exciting industry in the world at the moment, with all the growth opportunities, the headroom to grow if we are smart about it. And collaborations are definitely, or the competition is definitely the way to go. But at the moment, it's like everyone wants to be a content company. All this creators economy and everybody is talking content, but TiVo doesn't chase or even try to own content. It's simply connects it with audiences and advertiser. But what's the advantage of staying a connector? Or are we going to get TiVo originals one day soon?
Well, I mean, to me, this goes back to kind of that core DNA that you were talking about, right? And TiVo, when you think about TiVo, again, was really understanding data, understanding what consumers are watching, and make that predictive modeling to then make recommendations towards other pieces of content. It's a true agnostic platform. That again is kind of the crux of, hey, we're not trying to suggest anything that's necessarily going to push money our way. It's we want you, the consumer, to spend as much time as possible using our technology. And inherently, that stickiness will create revenue opportunities for everyone. I think if you think about kind of different smart TV operating systems or apps, like, let's be honest, creating content is wildly expensive, and it requires a real specialty that, again, kind of comes from a creative side. I remember everybody kind of kept talking about how Netflix was like the world's greatest thing since sliced bread, because they could look at everything everybody was watching, and then they could create content based off of that. So it was it was the first time anybody really started to talk about like having this data-led approach to creating content. And they always use the House of Cards example.
Yes.
Nobody's denying that, but like, it is interesting. But like, you can only really start to do that if you have data. But on the flip side, again, there's also always going to be a need for consumers to just find good content, because we all know how much time we waste trying to find that.
Yes, and sort of to grab this attention in the everyday, more innovative ways, because there is just such abundance of content, and not look at fast channels. Okay, let's not touch on. Let's not even talk about fast channels. This is for the next time. But let's touch on attention. So something in every advertiser's sweet spot, I guess we could say that. But everyone talks about attention. I feel it's like a new currency, but it's still one of the hardest things to define, let alone measure. So you guys with TiVo, you sit in a sort of unique position to see how this attention fluctuates. You mentioned data earlier. How do you define attention, and how do you prove it in a way that advertisers actually value and understand?
So I think there's a truth to this that is, if I tried to define attention to you or to an advertiser, it ultimately is just going to kind of fall flat. Everybody has their own definition of what attention is. Our objective is how do we kind of fit into that and be as agnostic as possible. And I say this, I've been on the monetization side of the business for my entire career. So always working with advertisers and advertising agencies. And the one thing that I learned pretty quickly on is don't try to tell them how they can grade their own homework, because at the end of the day, you're not setting yourself up for success. And the irony of all this, and I'll take a step back for a second. The irony of all this is, this was probably back in 2012-ish, give or take. Yeah, so I mean, a little over 10 years ago. I actually worked at the company Moat as they were rolling out viewability and attention metrics into the advertising market. And I was literally the first person to talk to somebody about viewability, and more from a display, not CT. CTV didn't even exist then. And the looks that I get back at people trying to tell me, like, what is this? Like, why? Like agencies and brands saying, I don't want this. I don't want to know where my ads are running or who's actually being exposed to those. Look at it now, right? It's a requirement now. It's table stakes. But I think from TiVo's perspective and from a CTV perspective, this goes back to that fragmentation piece. I think it's about understanding, kind of from an advertiser's perspective, where your ads are sitting in that smart TV environment, and really understanding kind of, again, what are users doing in that moment. And the example that I always kind of go to is, because as I was alluding to earlier, you turn that television set on. Mm-hmm. You've got the remote control in your hand. You're turning your TV on to go find content. I've never seen anybody turn a TV on with the remote in one hand and have their cell phone in the other. I've never seen it. I'm sure some people do it.
Come to us to watch telly on Saturday afternoon.
Well, usually I've got a drink in my hand, not a phone. But then the remote goes down and the phone comes up. So trust me, it's inevitable that it happens. But in that exact moment. So this is why I keep going back to, like, that homepage, like that kind of initial experience is really critical, right? You've got a user's attention. And again, I always think of myself as the example. I can't really speak for other people. You either know exactly what you're going to go watch, or you've got no clue and you're ready to go surf. You kind of fit in one of those two buckets. And on any given day it changes, of course. But that's where I kind of think it all starts at that journey right there at that homepage. I think that's where there's kind of a really kind of critical, we'll call it land grab for lack of a better word, but a really unique opportunity for both content partners and brand, like non-entertainment advertisers as well. I think that's a huge opportunity.
Yeah, that's true. But actually, do you remember? Maybe it just was me. I actually had an app on my phone that was a remote to my, I can't remember what was the telly at the time.
Well, that's cheating. That doesn't count. Come on.
But is it not a clever way, sneaky way of like, let's get them on the mobile, but it never worked for me. That was the one thing, but it was an attempt. But let's just bring my favorite part of the TV pass. Well, I suppose you brought this up already, the audience. So, and the audience experience on the telly. So as automation ultimately takes over more of the ad layer, how do you keep that balance between the optimization of ads and viewer experience? And when everything on screen can be monetized, where do you draw the line and say, that's it, leave at least the top right 2 pixels without a dollar sign?
Yeah. The honest truth is, like, which company isn't trying to monetize an audience if they've got it? And again, this is, to me, to take a step back and really think about why I love working for TiVo so much. This is a huge opportunity because, again, the DNA and core of the company was always that consumer first, tech led. Let's keep you on the platform so you're watching as much content as possible. Again, that membrane hasn't changed, and that's what I love about us. As an organization that's been around for over 2 decades. Whereas you think about some of the newer startup companies, that's not necessarily their objective. They're trying to maximize profits and drive, advertising, the advertising wedge anywhere that they can. And I use that wedge very, very literally as well, which some people might pick up on. But what's interesting, I guess for me, when I think of audience, again, it just goes back to, if you hammer somebody over the head with ads, they're just going to leave. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, the
And
attention, please. They go somewhere
of
else.
course, who wants it? It's like, nobody has more time for it, but you can do it in creative ways. So I think there's kind of again, this kind of ebb and flow. But one thing I would say, you talk about automation. You think about, again, most people, when you talk about connected TV, their immediate reaction is in-stream video. And so they're kind of thinking, again, people, again, whether it's in a BVOD app in the UK or one of these kind of AVOD / new SVOD apps, like they're thinking of that video environment. Those, by and large, are bought and sold programmatically now. By and large, not always. You're seeing a lot of the broadcasters have a little bit of trepidation until they're getting there. They're moving in that direction, but they're not there yet because they're still relying on kind of their more linear traditional feeds as a way to buy and sell media. But I think you're seeing that in-stream video, again, turning into a true programmatic fashion. The example that I like to talk about in the UK that I think is a bit of the future, it's more of a quasi crystal ball. I think of companies like ETV, are Freely in the UK as well, which is basically, again, kind of the evolution of what Freeview was. And it's now a combination of all of the local UK PSBs coming together and having live broadcast TV streamed over IP. As that becomes more prominent, that I think will change the game for CTV and then shift everything into basically becoming fully automatic and programmatic, more or less, which is only going to help consumers in the audience because it's going to start to send off a lot more signals that I think brands can then start to align their messaging with that specific audience that they're going after. So I think that's going to really open up the door and in my opinion, bust down some of that fragmentation and make it one buying kind of platform or one buying base that, again, is only going to help advertisers really understand and reach audiences at the right moments.
Yeah,
so I think that's something that's basically a work in progress right now.
And I think this is great. I'm really optimistic and excited about actually where we're heading. I know that there are still doom and gloom scaremongers out there. Maybe I'm just in denial, but this is all happening, especially with this AI promise and automation, and it's great. But I guess you're right. As long as the viewer's experience is in the trade-off, because the attention and will flee, but AI and automation are almost rewriting how value moves through the TV industry, and from content production and discovery to ad delivery. I mean, you touched on discovery. I think that we don't even appreciate the change that AI discoverability brings. But the industry, in some ways, I feel that has never had more tools or opportunities to grow. And I sometimes call this the idea, monetization idea gap. Is like there's no excuse. You've got every tools and every piece of data. Just come up with a great way of monetize it. But what still stands in the way of turning that innovation into consistent growth across the markets?
Money. I honestly, I don't know. I think
the love of money. I know. My mom keeps
No. So, here, let me double click on that. That probably didn't make any sense. No, so more specifically, tying ROAS, right? Getting that true verification of like, hey, this is driving revenue for brands when they're actually buying these types of ads. And again, I keep going back to the days of yore, right? Think of linear TV. You've got a brand that then wants to put its ad in front of a specific audience. They will go buy specific programs that has been, modeled out to show that they're reaching a said demographic, right? Pretty well standardized globally. You pick any market and they've got their vendors that do this. And it's kind of a trusted, tried and true method. Nobody's disproven that. That still works. And it's pretty obvious that still works. But CTV, there's still not that connective tissue. And that is a huge challenge. If you're going to a brand that has been buying linear TV ads for X number of years or decades, and you're telling them, hey, we've got this new great way that I can contextually align your brand with consumers based off of X, Y, Z targeting, content signals, whatever data it might be, whether that's done through programmatic automation, some sort of AI, audience kind of build out, all that sounds great. But unless you can actually show results, it feels like a bit of a pipe dream. it sounds like it. And it doesn't mean it's not effective, but if you can't drive that direct correlation, you're always going to have people kind of questioning how valid and valuable it actually was. And that's where I think the huge opportunity is really kind of making that kind of purchase, that intent, making that much more quantifiable. I think that's where it starts to get really interesting.
Yeah, it is, and also the collaborations and the partnerships, and yes, all this meeting in the operating system that understands, that connects, that the data flows through it is it's a perfect place for TiVo to be.
Yeah, but think about that, Annie, right? So it's interesting, again, and this goes back to kind of the initial example I talked about with collaboration. And I'll say this and I'll pivot to kind of where I see there's kind of a parallel path here. Amazon, let's not hide from the fact that this is the world's largest commerce platform. If you've now got an opportunity to basically access a ton of inventory and audiences through their pipes and connect that back with purchase data, that's the holy grail, right? So that's kind of the digital side, but let's not forget that there's a huge retail opportunity.
Yeah.
And I think this is something that also, it gets talked about, but you think about like this whole concept of like retail media as it relates to connected TV. There's still a lot of retail, like physical retail shops that have their own branded TVs. Now, those branded TVs need to have an operating system. Now, those operating systems are the likes of your TiVos, where we're working really closely with these retail companies, but then also working with those retail media teams to have that connective tissue with what are those consumers buying on their websites or in their stores? How do you start to connect those dots? And there's ways to do that now with the TV operating systems, with those physical retailers, not just the digital way like that Amazon's kind of pushing right now. But those two pillars right there start to kind of show again that way to drive that ROAS, which is what every advertiser is looking for.
No, retail media is the absolute next frontier for growth on CTV, but also I'm working now with a small company from Israel. We always want to measure and understand attribution, and they connect the offline and online consumer journey, which I think that to bring everything from out of home through CTV, and then the in-store, the brick and mortar experience, if you could bring this consumer end-to-end and attribution to advert, it's just mind-blowing. So that's another one which is fascinating on the horizon. 2026 will be CTV and retail media. That's my prediction.
And it's funny because it's not like retail media is a new term, right? Obviously, people have been talking about this for years. But again, the way I think about this from a CTV perspective is, again, look at the US as a great example, and look at how Walmart bought Vizio, again, one of the largest TV manufacturers and brands in the United States. Now, obviously, they don't exist in Europe, but to me, that's a roadmap. That's a blueprint right there. When I think of kind of like what could the future of a TiVo OS or some of these other kind of smart TV operating systems start to look like, there's a natural synergy there. But before I even kind of dive into that, I guess like go back to your example earlier where you talked about using your mobile device as a remote control.
Yeah.
When you think about tying offline to online, there's really only a few touch points that really kind of interconnect all of those.
I just got a couple more questions, just as we were talking about the hurdles to progress, and also I was thinking about you being an American man in Europe. How do you see this Europe's fragmentation and regulation? And whether this, because this is often seen as a hurdle to growth, but I'm actually thinking, could this become the driver of smarter transformation and innovation? So, how do you see it in Europe?
It's interesting you say that. Well, first of all, I'm in the UK. Can we call that Europe? Does that still count? What's the
okay? We'll edit this one out.
One, I mean, when I think about kind of the European opportunity, I'll be honest. I think when I first moved here, I saw it as a negative. And specifically what I mean by that is Europe, by and large, is a free-to-air type of environment as it relates to TV. So that basically just means like anybody who doesn't have, or anybody who's basically outside of the major broadcasters is in a very tough position. And you're still seeing that play out. One thing I always kind of say is like, if you think about any European market, If you look at the fastest growing connected TV in terms of monetization on CTV, it's always the markets that have the most amount of competition, particularly as it relates to the broadcasters. The handful of markets that might only have 2 or 3 broadcasters haven't typically evolved into CTV as much as the others. So I think there's a direct correlation.
Yeah.
But this goes back to what I was talking about earlier, where I think of like Freely in the UK is a really good example of how those broadcasters could start to partner together
I
and
agree.
really jump hand in hand into the CTV space and drive a lot quicker adoption. And also, most importantly, basically have the buying language unified. Because that right there is the gap. Like, you're talking apples and oranges. If you are selling connected TV, you go to an ad agency, to an AV buyer who's used to buying linear TV. They've got metrics that they've got to report on to their client. When you start to interject connected TV metrics and attribution, it doesn't necessarily correlate into their story. So they're in a really kind of difficult spot to try to bring those two together. And I think once broadcasters can really kind of lead that, if they do lean into this from the CTV and kind of over IP streaming, kind of digital formation, that's going to create that opportunity to have everybody speaking the same language.
But is that collaboration at scale or creating that scale the only way we or they can face the big tech companies with the huge amount of content, huge amount of money? Is this one way of competing with them?
In essence, yeah, I think it is. And this is hot off the press. This is what earlier this week, they're talking about ITV and Sky now potentially merging in the UK. Like you're starting to see companies that are having to do this to feel that they are able to compete with the likes of an Amazon, Google, or some of the other bigger tech kind of behemoths. I don't know if it's necessarily the only way, but I will say it is something that, they haven't necessarily, in most markets, they haven't necessarily leaned into it as much as they probably could have. And you're seeing their revenue not necessarily decline, but it's not growing at the same levels that it has. So I think that is, again, definitely something that you'll start to see over time, if they don't really, again, kind of jump into it head first.
2026 will be fascinating. This is where the sort of AI noise will calm down and it's perceived as a tool. The retail media is coming in, the more collaborations. I think maybe there will be some sort of M&A activity in both sides of the Atlantic. I mean, I can't wait to see what's going to happen. But if you look ahead 3 years, like forget 5, because 5 and 10 years horizon doesn't exist anymore. So if you look ahead 3 years, what's the one thing you think will define the next phase of connected TV?
Oh, it's so funny. It's such like a simple question, but it's so difficult because you can take this in so many directions. When I think of this as what's really going to define it, I think it's how do you, I'm going to go back to attribution. I think it's whenever platforms can start to say, hey, client, you're spending X amount of money with us in our platform, we can deliver Y amount of value or revenue, like in a quantifiable fashion. I think that's what's going to really define this. So I think the parties and the companies that are positioning themselves for that type of conversation are the ones that are going to thrive, because that's what's going to bring in money from social media. That's what's going to bring money in from other sources, not just cannibalize and take money away from traditional linear TV. It's going to bring in new budgets. And I think that right there is, again, the way to really kind of grow this pie faster than just have it trickle from traditional into digital.
I think you're spot on. And well, let's hope 2026 will be as fabulous as it promises. And I feel that that's an inspiring place to close our conversation. So, Chris, thank you for all the insight and for joining me on Media Unscripted.
Annie, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.